Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of our program, Jones and Company. On this program, we examine the national issues of the Bahamas. There are many people around the Bahamas who are distressed because the people from Abaco in the main and Grand Bahama, they suffered greatly due to Hurricane Darius. And so the shelters are full in New Providence, and there are many people who are delivering relief supplies in our country. And happily, there are a number of international organizations that have been chipping in over the last week or so, not only bringing relief supplies, but they have been donating funds for hurricane relief in our country. And so this is a time when most Bahamians would tell you that they are assisting in many ways to bring about relief to many of our countrymen who are hurting in the northern Bahamas in particular. Children have been displaced. They are seeking schools here in New Providence, and many are traumatized as well. And so one of the Bahamians who live abroad, who is here bringing relief, is the Reverend Darius Butler. He is the pastor of the First Missionary Baptist Church in Huntsville, Alabama. He is our guest on the program today. He told me that he is from Coconut Grove originally, and it's good to have him here on the program. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm glad to be here to share with you.
Thank you so very much. And for those of us who do not know you, you have to tell us your antecedents, you know? You grew up in New Providence, yes?
Yes. And grew up at 5th Street, The Grove, Market Street South, son of George Lancey, a businessman and entrepreneur, Suzanne Butler, a worker at the hospital, and graduate of the class of 2000 at C.I. Gibson Secondary School.
Very good. And so you are pastoring now in Huntsville.
Yes, sir.
So you attended school in the United States.
Yes. After taking a gap year after high school, I matriculated at American Baptist College in Nashville, where many Bahamian Baptist clergymen received their formal theological education. Received my master's from Vanderbilt University and a doctorate from Duke University.
From Duke, okay. You went to some good schools. After coming out of Tennessee, you went to Duke, to Vanderbilt first, and then Duke. Many Bahamian clergymen followed that same path. I don't know about Duke, but certainly Vanderbilt.
Yes.
Yeah. And the hurricane brought you back, bringing good news for your countrymen, eh?
Yes. So I have family members who live in Grand Bahama, great aunt, a number of cousins and aunts and uncles who were there, who were severely affected by the storm. As a matter of fact, the family in our WhatsApp chat were just coordinating efforts to get the great aunt from Grand Bahama to New Providence, hopefully to go with her son in Texas. But just to know what it is like to experience the ravaging effects of Mother Nature when she releases kind of her furor upon these chain of islands. My heart was broken, deeply concerned about the welfare of my own people. So if I were to relate it to a passage of the Hebrew scriptures, it would definitely be that of Nehemiah, one who, though comfortable where I am with my immediate family, concerned about my parents, my siblings, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, those with whom I share family relationships, ancestry, and ties. And to know that even though residing in the United States, I am Bahamian through and through.
And you have been coordinating, I guess, some relief supplies or whatever else for Bahamians, eh?
Yes. So my congregation, First Missionary Baptist Church, has kind of adopted this hashtag 256. Our area code there loves 242, and our local churches in Huntsville are preparing and coordinating now their supplies. A global missions initiative called So Send I You, upon which whose board I serve, As a trustee, we are bringing also our executive director and our vice chairman of the board. They will meet me here this weekend so we can go into Grand Bahama and to see what is needed to make the connections with the agencies, the pastors, and the officials there to sustain a long-term partnership.
Mm-hmm. So Sendayu, how long has that been established?
It's been in existence for almost 10 years. So we have a great track record of responding to natural disasters. We did so in Haiti after the earthquake of 2010. We did so in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. We have been sponsoring programs in Malawi for several years now, building desks for students at the Providence Industrial Missions in Chirad Zulu, in Blantyre mission stations in South Africa, in Soweto, in East London, in Cape Town, in the townships of Langa, of Guguletu. So we've got a track record of doing the work.
So it's international in scope.
Correct.
Yeah. You know, when the hurricane struck those two family islands, there are a whole lot of people who lost their homes.
Yes.
They are homeless. And many of them, they are in need of shelter.
Yes.
Do you go as far as helping with shelter?
So this particular trip is about fact-finding and doing the work of the needs assessment. And we are touring the facilities to see what infrastructure remains, what is needed to go forward, and how we can bring both immediate relief and the long-term support. Today, we were making our rounds to the various shelters here in New Providence, and it is obvious that there is a need. The loss of material goods is one thing, but now there is a despair and a hopelessness that can set in when one has been broken to this point of loss. Unimaginable and unspeakable casualty and just property destruction is akin to what the ancient people of Israel faced when Jerusalem was sacked and they were taken away captive into Babylon.
You know, as you say that, I think of many who went through the storm, and I've spoken to a number of people in Grand Bahama in particular who are traumatized. Their children are traumatized. And this is a time for the church really to be at its best, eh?
Yes, yes. So if you take the gospel seriously, you would have this passage tucked away in Matthew chapter 25, where the judgment of the nations and those who claim to know the Christ and to follow him is not based upon the mode of baptism. It's not based upon attendance to synagogue or religious assemblies, but it is based upon how we care for the vulnerable. So when there would be the great judgment, and then those who will be dismissed from entrance and admission into the kingdom, they shall inquire on what basis are they being dismissed. And they shall hear, when I was sick, you did not visit me. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was hungry, you didn't give me food. When I was imprisoned, you didn't feed me. And of course, they will inquire, well, when did we see you in such dire straits? When did we come across you in such a condition? And Jesus shall say to them, inasmuch as you have done it to the least of these, inasmuch as you have been inconsiderate, inasmuch as you have gained profits without conscience, inasmuch as you have made people expendable because money is the ultimate goal and interest of life, then you have done it unto him. And then we shall understand that it is God's intention that good sociology follows good theology as a matter of course.
Sociology follows
theology. Yes. That if you have good theology, you will have good sociology.
And you would have a social conscience.
Most definitely. Most definitely. For it is impossible. It is impossible to read on the pages of the New Testament record the life and the ministry of Jesus, to see the healing stories, to understand with whom he identified, with whom he kept company, with those who he sought to bring the kingdom, and to think that they do not figure prominently in the economy of God or the interests of those who say and claim that we follow the Christ.
Mhm. You know, I hear clergymen speak about the economy of God often. And we are all in the economy of God, aren't we? And we have various roles to play in the scheme of things. But the question that I have asked many clerics over the last week or so is, what is God saying when you see this level of destruction, people who have lost their lives, lost their homes, children who have been washed away, and many people displaced? What is he saying to a so-called Christian nation like the Bahamas?
So it is a deeply weighty question, and one that I do not speak glibly in response to, for I am comfortable enough, even in uncertainty, to say with humility, I do not know. And that may come as a surprise to those who presume that the faithful ought to give some conclusive response to the issues of natural catastrophes, of national crises, etc. But I find comfort in the sense that God's care for God's creation is unwavering, it is sure, it is certain, it is constant. And to the degree that God has created our world and shares power with it, these occurrences will continue. It is a question at the heart of a theological conundrum called theodicy. Why does a good God permit such calamity to befall people who are good, who are God-fearing, etc.? But again, in this experience, it shows that the elemental forces of our world do not discriminate. They can visit good, bad, and indifferent all the same. My belief theologically is that God is mourning with us, concerned with us about now the immeasurable loss of life, with over 1,200 persons still missing and unaccounted for, is concerned about the lack of protections for those who were most vulnerable before the storm and would be made even more vulnerable after the storm, is concerned about those who could not afford to evacuate and to escape the storm, and as a result are caught up in it. But mainly, I think it is not so much as a question of what is God saying and doing, in as much as it is the question, what do the people who claim God say and do in response to this storm? For I suspect and do observe that this storm in its aftermath exposes some fault lines in our moral fabric as a nation that we have perhaps left unaddressed for any length of time, that we are forced to confront because they now stare us in the face, especially as our people seek refuge and seek aid and resource and assistance either in New Providence or in the Floridas.
You know, but we are people who, these islands were developing quite nicely, the Abacos and Grand Bahama. And we hear that, as I said just now, that we are a Christian nation. And people were going about their business, seeking to improve the quality of life for themselves and their children. But this is interpreted by many theologians as being the wrath of God.
Yes.
Because we would have seen in the scriptures that the wrath of God befell many ancient cities. Yes. Why was that the wrath of God back then, and this is not the wrath of God now?
Well, so my humble claim is that I do not have sufficient evidence to make such a conclusion.
You don't know the mind of God.
No, and even as a minister theologian with some 10, 11 years of robust, vibrant theological engagement,
Yes.
with an ongoing appetite and curiosity for these deep truths and matters, and holding the mystery of God in a good conscience, I have to conclude that there are some things we do not know. Now, much of what we get in the record of Scripture is our reflection on events past, not necessarily a telling of events to come, in as much as they are the historical reflection on what has been, and theological commentary based upon what has been. Now, if you take, for instance, Jeremiah 29, when Jeremiah says in verse 11, I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope. It is essentially a passage that is polemical in nature, because there were false prophets who arose to tell Judah, your time of captivity and suffering was to be short. And Jeremiah is setting them up for a long-term residency in an unfamiliar land. But he is saying to them, even as you are facing a social disorientation, one has to return to the foundational touchstones of their faith and religion to ground them when the world in which they inhabit is eerily unfamiliar. And so he says, while you are in this land, though in captivity, you ought to do some things. Why don't you build houses? Why don't you get married? Why don't you have children? Why don't you plant the basic resources that you need to sustain and flourish life until things become better? I think the preoccupation with having divine pronouncements with some precision and some accuracy is an attempt to cover from the theological tension that we do not wish to struggle with in these moments. And so we have to either defend God in some way, or we must attribute it to God so that somehow it will work out in our own theological house sufficient enough so that we can live in it.
But he superintends in the lives of men. He has, as we sang in the Sunday school as children, he has the whole world in his hands.
Yes.
All right? And you and me and everybody, he has everything in his hands.
Yes.
And in his superintendence of the world, he made us, and he cares for us.
Yes.
But why would a caring God cause this level of destruction?
Yes. It
or would it permit this level of destruction?
It is the fundamental question with which we grapple in this moment. It is. My response is this: that with God's superintendence of God's world, God shares power with our world. God is personable. God creates our worlds with laws and principles that it has its rhythms of summer, of winter, of springtime, of harvest, etc. These are the principles that give us the world that operates with a sense of purpose and meaning.
And climate change.
Yes, and there is a sense that there is agency on the part of those of us who are created in God's image and likeness. That while we have the potential to reflect the glory and the splendor of God, to be creative and to think and to process and to build and to create and to invent, etc., we also have this capacity to be self-centered, to be serving our own interests, irrespective of how it affects either each other or the world in which we live. So my question is, when is the last time that you have heard a homily, a sermon, some theological discourse on eco-theology, the sense of the world as being a stewardship for the human family so that it can reflect what God intends? What we get is more encroachment on sacred space of life, the taking of space, the building of developments without the concern for how they impact the ecosystem. It is our advancement serving our interests at whatever expense that we can spare. And then the earth responds in these ways that says, no, if you treat the earth poorly, you will get results as we have been seeing. Of course, we've seen storms before. Of course, there's been tragedy. But a part of what is taking place, though, is the fact that you must parse the natural catastrophe from public policy, human enterprise and interests that could have prevented some loss of life in many instances. And when we parse those things, we would see that we too have a part to play in this ongoing drama of living in the earth.
So we have not been coexisting with nature as we ought. Is that what you're saying?
Of course not. I mean, the science reveals, at least in the last decade, that with fossil fuel, with global warming, with rising sea levels, that we are going to face within the next decade or two even more natural catastrophes if we do not do something to stem what is taking place.
So these hurricanes then should teach us that we should be better stewards of what God has given us.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, we have taken for granted that it's a chain of islands in the Atlantic Ocean, having been protected from storms before, even though we have seen ravaging storms heretofore, that we are somehow a special protectorate of God, when God is no respecter of persons, and we have not been curious enough to have the kind of research and the investigation and the sciences particularly toward these areas. We have not earmarked funds to develop the discipline to engage this phenomenon when it affects us in very real ways. And I hope that as a consequence, we would rethink some of the areas of our national interests and development, and that it would cause us to be more intentional in weather-related technology and sciences.
Yes. We know that every year we have the Sahara, the dust coming from Sahara, the moisture coming from the Sahara, and the hot air flowing from Africa and going and circulating to the north, which brings about tropical storms and hurricanes. But yet we are careless in how we build and where we live and how we go about our lives. And so we must be intentional, to use your expression, about how we construct homes, where we live, the areas of the Bahamas where we live, because we are in the lane of the storms.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. I mean, it also is It is a natural consequence of human hubris,
Yes. Yes.
of what it means that to think that we are invincible,
Yes.
we are invulnerable, we are impervious to these kinds of things when we are not.
We are not.
And so we must ask the question as raised in the psalm, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And if we consider ourselves to be a special interest of God, yes, but not the only interest of God, then we would see ourselves as being stewards of the world God has given to us.
Yes. Let's take a break here. We have as a guest on our program today Reverend Darius Butler, who is the pastor of the First Community Missionary Baptist Church in Huntsville, Alabama. We'll come right back.